So everybody knows that Macs are not meant for gaming, nor do they perform very well even if you max out all of the upgrades on something like the 27-inch iMac, but the iMac Pro starts at $5,000 US for the base model, so for that amount of money, it has to be able to game, right? So before I get into the benchmarks, I want to talk a little bit about the hardware that's packed inside the iMac Pro. The model I have here is just the base model with an 8-core Intel Xeon processor, 32 gigs of RAM, a 1TB SSD, and Radeon Pro Vega 56 graphics. Now, if you don't already know, Xeon processors generally perform worse in games compared to their consumer core lineup like the Core i7 found in the less expensive 27-inch iMac. However, the iMac Pro has a faster graphics card compared to the Radeon Pro 580 in the iMac, so I'm not sure how the overall gaming performance compares, but my guess is that it's going to be at least a fair bit faster overall. The thing I want to mention with the Pro Vega cards inside the iMac Pro is that they're pretty much locked down. You can't overclock or change the voltage on it, nor can you manually adjust the fan speed, so the numbers you see here are going to be pretty accurate with what you're going to get. So for all of the games, I'll be running them in Windows 10 just because it has better support for games compared to Mac OS, and games just generally perform better on Windows than Mac. I'll be testing all of the games at native 5K resolution as well as 1440p, and also have anti-aliasing and VSync turned off for all of the games I'll be testing here. So I started off with Team Fortress 2 just because it's a lighter title and it's one of the few games that I actually play, and even at native 5K on mostly high settings, we're hovering at around 200 to 230 frames per second here. So I think with this game, we've pretty much established that the iMac Pro can indeed play all lighter titles at full 5K without a hitch. Although, I wouldn't actually recommend doing so because if the game isn't optimized, the UI will look microscopic and it'll be impossible to see anything on your screen. So moving on to Cry Primal, I actually had a couple of my buddies come over to check it out, play some video games, and help me benchmark their performance because admittedly I'm not too big of a gamer myself, and at full 5K resolution on normal settings, we're getting just shy of 30 frames per second here. If you tone it down to 1440p on very high settings, we're averaging around 60 frames per second here, with it dipping down to the mid 40s in certain areas. Funny enough though, even at full 5K resolution, it was using only 30% of the total 8 gigs of VRAM here. So moving on to Rise of the Tomb Raider, at full 5K resolution with high graphics settings, I ran the in-game benchmark and we're getting an average of 28 frames per second here, with a minimum of 20 and a maximum of 45 frames per second. I ran the benchmark a second time with the same graphics settings but lowered the resolution to 2560 by 1440. This time we're getting an average of 83 frames per second with a minimum of 31 and a maximum of 144. Wolfenstein II worked fairly well, averaging 37 frames per second at 5K high settings, and if you lower the resolution down to 1440p, still at high settings, we're averaging around 117 frames per second, so frame rates are looking really good here. GTA 5 is also getting fairly old now, but I thought I'd just throw it in anyway. Running at 5K with a bit of high to very high graphics, we're averaging around 38 frames per second here, but when I dropped it down to 1440p, for some reason, I'm being capped at 60 frames per second. I have VSync turned off, but something is forcing the game to be locked at 60 and I have no clue what's going on. One thing that I did notice is that playing at 5K resolution made the mouse cursor feel really slow and heavy, and dropping it down to 1440p made everything just feel a lot more responsive, and that's something I didn't see happen with the other games, which is a little bit odd, but there you have it. I tried to test out The Witcher 3 and Doom, but both of them just didn't work at all. Like, they loaded up, but the GPU didn't recognize the game, so it sat at idle clock speeds. Even in the main menu, I was literally getting between 3 and 6 frames per second. I did see a post on Reddit where this person was running Doom at around 45 FPS, so I'm not sure why these two games in particular aren't being recognized for me, but as of right now, I couldn't find any info on why this is happening. I tried rebooting, I tried checking for updates, and it was still these two games in particular that wouldn't load up the GPU. Fan noise was audible, but I noticed that the fan seemed to spin up much earlier for the graphics card compared to the processor. Once the GPU reaches about 80 degrees, the fans start to ramp up from nearly silent to fairly audible. The CPU peaked at around 80 degrees Celsius and the GPU peaked at 95 degrees with a stable 92 degrees Celsius. It didn't throttle, in fact it kept a stable 1247 MHz, but the weird thing is that the temperatures seem to fluctuate a lot, and you can see this when I alt-tabbed out of the game to check on hardware monitor. It drops instantly from 92 degrees to 81 degrees, and then right down to the low 70s in a matter of seconds, and the GPU load drops from 100% to 0 despite the fact that the game is still running in the background. There were also a lot of weird issues when trying to check the specs of the GPU using GPU-Z, but regardless, I haven't seen any thermal throttling despite the high temperature peaks. Before I close this video off, I want to talk about one last thing. While I was showering last night, I had this crazy, insane idea go through my head where somebody would buy the iMac Pro, void the warranty and take it apart, replace the Xeon with a Core i9 Extreme Edition, replace the ECC RAM with just normal RAM so it actually works because Core processors aren't compatible with ECC, and then hook up an external GPU box and install the new Titan V. It's absolutely outrageous and completely impractical, but I'm not gonna lie, I'd love to see someone actually carry this out and turn an iMac Pro into a 5K gaming machine and start uploading games in full 5K resolution. So there you have it, the 2017 iMac Pro can in fact play games and play them very well with AAA titles getting over 60 frames per second at 1440p high settings, or about 30 frames per second at native 5K resolution. Obviously, I still don't recommend buying the iMac Pro purely for gaming because this thing starts at an insane $5,000, but if you just want to game on the side with this thing, then yeah, I'd say definitely go for it. The screen is crazy sharp and detailed, and having that 500 nits of brightness genuinely made my games look that much better. So I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe even found it useful. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you left a like on this video. This is Infinity Labs, and we'll catch you guys later.